Welcome to the Leading Conversations podcast, sponsored by the Excel Leadership Network. On each episode, JD Pairing will have conversations with church planting pastors and leaders from around the country. You can learn more about how to connect with Excel at the end of this podcast. Let's join JD now and listen in on this leading conversation.
Welcome to the Excel Leadership Podcast. We are very excited to have the great Josh Husmann with us today. Josh is pastor of Mercy Road Church in Carmel, Indiana, but also has started Multiply Indiana and is planting churches all over Indiana. Hey, Josh, what's your goal for Multiply Indiana? How many churches do you want to do in Indiana?
Our ultimate goal is to reach 1 million people for Christ by the year 2050, which is a ridiculous goal. There's less than 7 million people in the whole state of Indiana, but we intentionally set it that way, a God-sized vision. And within that, we want to plant a minimum of 100 churches through Multiply Indiana by the year 2030 is the current goal for Multiply Indiana. And then Mercy Road, which is the church that my wife and I moved to plant. We moved from Southern California, planted the church in the fall of 2011. And we set out to plant 4 new Mercy Road churches right before the global pandemic started. So it was great timing. And it's been incredible to see how God has been faithful, though. I mean, if you would have told me we would be in the position that we are with what we call the Mercy Road family of churches, I would never have believed it. It's a total God thing.
Did you say your goal is 100 new churches by 2030?
Yeah, that is what we've been pushing towards. And we've had weird seasons of stuff. We planted about 15 churches in a 3-year period. And then we've kind of taken some time to make sure those are getting healthy. And we're getting ready to do another big push of plants here soon.
Well, that is fantastic. And hopefully we can partner on many or most, if not all of those. But I'm interested in finding out how this started. Tell us, you're from Indiana. How did you come to Christ and how did you get involved in just jumping into ministry?
Yeah, I grew up around church, but I didn't get it. And I was in college, I was in the fraternity house, and somebody had the audacity to talk to me about their faith. And I went to a campus ministry and ended up giving my life to Christ. I went out and got drunk the next couple of nights and decided, it's time for a life change. I meant what I prayed, and my life has been different ever since. And got involved in starting a Bible study in the fraternity house, started getting into ministry on campus and then youth ministry, and worked at a Christian sports camp in the summertime. And when I graduated college, had felt and experienced this call into ministry. I didn't think it would be in a church, but I had a lot of spiritual, theological, historical questions that I really needed to answer. And so that's actually why I went to seminary. I moved to Southern California, went to Fuller Seminary, and did an MDiv there, and was in the middle of a DMin, and I'd been working at a large church. Back then it was Pomona First Baptist, now called Purpose Church, and youth and young adult ministry, mainly young adult ministry, and was there for 7 years and experienced this calling to move to Indiana, start a church. And it was a distinct moment of prayer where I felt and experienced the presence of God like I've never experienced in my life, and to move and plant this church. And that 3 friends of mine from high school were going to help us plant the church was what I had received at that time, which I don't talk like that lightly. And one of the guys wasn't a Christian. One was working for Entertainment Tonight in Los Angeles and had just gone through a divorce. And the other friend was in a small town in Indiana. And I just thought this was insane. Within 6 months of that prayer, my family and I were living in Indiana. And the first 3 people to help us start the church were those 3 friends from high school, which honestly, I didn't even notice it at first because I was mad because about 40 friends that I had known growing up all said no. And the only people who said yes were these 3 friends of mine from high school. And when I realized it, that really just freaked me out to know, that God really spoke to me in that moment. And so got to Indiana and started planting a church.
Wow. I need to back up and ask what college and what fraternity you're in.
Well, the college was DePaul University with a W on the end, small liberal arts college in Western Indiana, and DU Delta Upsilon is the name of the fraternity. Not well known nationally. It's one of the few non-secretive fraternity houses, which I joined because my brother was in it. I have an older brother who was also at the same school and fraternity.
Okay. I have a similar background. I was in the Delta House, Delta Tau Delta, which is a national fraternity. I was there at UCLA only because I needed a place to stay, and my dad was in that fraternity at his college. So I need and that's where I came to Christ as well. So
that's cool.
Not everybody that joins a fraternity.
No,
maybe you don't necessarily stay and I can't think of a good term that you could actually say on a pod.
It's not normally a spiritual place for sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
Tell us about I know your wife's from Southern California. What was her thoughts about moving to Indiana and planting a church?
Yeah, when I asked her, first of all, I was just like, well, God spoke to me, so he's going to speak to her. So I was like, hey, God spoke to me about something. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Just pray, and God's going to tell you the same thing. So the next day, she's like, I didn't hear anything. Tell me what it is. And I told her what it is, and she prayed about it, and she actually came back. I could not believe this because a year earlier, it made a little sense to go to Indiana because I grew up in a small town in Indiana and my parents still lived there. And a year earlier, I had taken my wife back to Indiana and we went to a small county fair, and she had never been to a small county fair in Indiana. And she saw some things that she had never seen before. And I'm not making this up. When she didn't know that some of this was real, that it existed, like mullets and other things like that, like she thought that was just like in the movies, like Joe Dirt and stuff. I could not believe this. She really didn't think it existed. So she finally, this is long before the call to church plant. She said, if you ever think about moving to Indiana, I'm not going because I would never fit in here. And I was like, yeah, don't worry, that's not happening. And yeah, that short time later, we experienced this call and she prayed about it and she said, yeah, I think we need to do it. And I couldn't believe it. It was just kind of a total God thing. And we moved within 6 months.
Can I ask on that? And it's amazing to hear that Joe Dirt was one of your first members. Was that the high school friend that helped you start?
No.
But I want to ask, you said you had this time with God. If somebody's looking for direction in their vision and God's plan for their life, is there something that you did that you would encourage them to do? I mean, God's speaking to you and your wife. I know that happens a lot, but some people are just looking for their next step.
Yeah, when it comes to that calling, I mean, first of all, when it comes to church planting, I'm really big on calling because, those first couple of years of church planting for us were pretty rough. And it would have been so easy to throw in the towel if we weren't resting in that the Lord had called us to do this. And we just had to be faithful. And, so that was important to me. But I think, as far as how it happened, it took time. I talk about this moment of prayer all the time, but it was 18 months leading up to that where we had been trying to buy a house in Southern California. The economy had tanked. Houses were much more affordable. We had been the highest offer on a number of homes. We had made offers on over 40 different homes in an 18-month period. And every single one of them, every single time, even when we were the highest offer, fell through. And it was very frustrating and it was really weird. And so, the 6 months leading up to that calling, we had finally just started praying, God, if we're going about this wrong, like just tell us what you want. We just want to be in the center of your will. And we just had this uneasiness. And that's when somebody gave me a free ticket to a conference. I went to it and I just kind of opened myself up at that moment to say, okay, God, whatever you want. And it was in that moment of prayer where I got down on my knees in this little hotel room at this conference and just said, God, I want to be in the center of your will. We'll go wherever you want. You want us to go to overseas to another country. You want us to stay in the place, whatever you want us to do, we want to do it. And I think for me, it was that God needed 18 months of my pride and, thinking I know what I should do broken down to the point of desperation to hear from him. So yeah, I just think for me, at least, it was important. The timing was very important.
Wow. Wow. Can you talk, you have this gigantic vision, and I heard you recently say that God's vision is bigger than mine. But as far as as far as people I know, church planters, I mean, your vision is right up there at the top. How did you develop such a big vision?
Well, some of it, there's a lot. So when I said that God's vision is bigger than mine, like I came from a small town in Indiana. I realized think smaller than a lot of lead pastors or even church planters. I didn't know that, but I just never thought much was possible. I remember we got our first building for the first church, and I just didn't think that was possible. I was never even going to try to do something like that. And, I think every step along the way where we have been, hopefully good or faithful, as we've been open to the Spirit. And okay, God, what are you speaking to us? And here's how the whole big vision and 1 million people for Christ happened. We were doing a pre-launch service before we launched the first church, and I was preaching out of Acts chapter 4, and this phrase stuck out to me in there of the bold faith. It's a phrase we still use today: live boldly, love deeply, and it kind of gives the grace and truth of Jesus, of how we're to live as Christians. And in that message, I just happened to say, like, hey guys, our vision is not to plant the church and grow a big church. Our goal is to reach as many people for Christ in the state of Indiana. We felt a distinct calling to the state of Indiana. We want to reach as many people for Christ in the state of Indiana as we can before we die, so that we would have this vision that we would reach a 1 million people within our state. And the reason was because it was such a large number, I felt like it was unobtainable. So it would force us to think multiplication, exponential growth, sending people out rather than trying to grow our church as large as we could. We now use the analogy that I think too often, the reason that we have such small, I think that this is my take, nobody has to agree with this, that the church model to grow our church bigger and bigger by addition, and the largest mega church we can create is a small vision. And what I mean by that is, I ask people what the largest living organism in the world is, and they might say the blue whale or even like the sequoias in California, right? And the sequoia can grow to this huge tree, but it pales in comparison to the largest living organism in the world, which is the aspen tree. The aspen tree, you can find clonal colonies that are over 5,000 square miles of forest that operates as one living organism, and the roots can plant new trees, and the saplings can plant new trees. So like it's just constantly multiplying and then operating together. And to me, that's a better picture of the New Testament and how you see the rapid mobilization and growth of the early church. And so that is a very long explanation of where that vision came from. There were theological principles about multiplication that we had. And so we set a vision that would require us to think way beyond how big we could grow our local church and think more about the broader kingdom impact.
Wow. Hey, how did you do the first church? I mean, a lot of churches talk about church planting, but they never get that first baby daughter church out. What was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, so and if I could tell you that there were some unique things that happened to us in the first year and a half of planting that I think really changed our mentality. When we moved from California, we had been living in Indiana for a month when we found out our unborn son had a genetic disorder and was not supposed to make it full term. And we began to pray and ask people online to pray. My wife kept a blog at that time, and a lot of people followed the blog. And we ended up seeing my son make it full term, and then he was supposed to die that night when he was born. And he ended up making it past that. And then we thought we might even get to take him home. And then after 2 weeks in the hospital, he passed away, and it was just devastating to us. And through that time, we stopped planting the church for about a month. We didn't talk to anybody. We mourned. We went out of town some. And it was just devastating. And the Lord at that time was so mad. And he put the message of John the Baptist on my mind at that moment. I was mad at him. I was talking to him. And it was just like, I began to read scripture on John the Baptist. Here was this guy that paved the way for all Jesus' ministry, did all these great kingdom things, and he was rewarded for it by having his head cut off and served to a pretentious woman on a silver platter. And then I read Hebrews 11, and you read the Hall of Faith, right? Abraham and Noah and all these great, incredible stories, and you think about how God always shows up and in the end does the good stuff. But then you read the end of Hebrews 11, and it talks about the other people in the Hall of Faith who were sawed in two, lived in caves, destitute, lost everything on the account of Christ, and that we don't get to determine our outcome. And so I share that because what happened to me was I stopped looking at the ministry and finding pride in what I could achieve and began to think more about what is the Lord up to, because he's the only one carrying us through this right now, because I would have thrown in the towel a long time ago. And when we started that mentality of just going, okay, Lord, what are you up to? Some of the best things in our church that ever happened came because we just said yes to things that the Lord was doing. And some of the really cool things we planned never worked out well. And so with that mentality, we were a month away from finally getting to launch the worship service of the church. And I heard we didn't have money for the equipment. And so we were a month away from launching. We did not have money for the equipment. So we prayed, and I got an email from this church in Florida that was going to give away $20,000 to the church plant with the best master plan. So I thought, well, we have a plan. So I sent them the plan. They told us we were a finalist, one of the 9 finalists for the grant. Turns out only 9 churches applied, but we spent money to go to Florida that we didn't have, got down there. Long story short, we ended up winning this grant. We bring the $20,000 back. We tell everybody what happened, and we said, can we match this? We raised another $20,000, and that $40,000 bought our equipment and started the church. And we just saw how God showed up if we were counting on him and his faithfulness, and not just on our strategy. And so I'd share all to answer your question of like how to actually become a church planting church. When we lived with that faith, we began to say, like, we could be extremely generous and give people and resources away, and God was still going to take care of us. And if the church died in the process, then it was supposed to die if it was for the kingdom purposes. Our goal was no longer for our church to survive. And so what ended up happening our first year, then we decided, hey, we're going to give away another $10,000 to church. And we only had like $20,000 in the bank or something. We gave $10,000 to a church plant in Montreal, Canada, that's still going today and reaching unchurched people for Christ up there. And that was just the mentality we had of, that whole planting pregnant concept that we're going to plant churches. And then when we were 3 years in and the church had really taken off all of a sudden, and we were reaching all these unchurched people and baptizing people, and we went through this incredible faith experience of buying our first building, that was when we came up with this idea of, when we get into the building, we're going to start rapidly planting churches. And we actually started Multiply, Indiana. And when we got into our brand new building and instantly told people about the first church plant, and some of our board members were freaked out because they're like, man, some of our families are going to go to this church, because it was only a minute down the road. It was Justin Davis in Hope City, JD. And what ended up happening was it's just this cool experience of, we sent some people and some resources, and yet the church continued to grow. I gave all of our board members the book by JD Greer, Gaining by Losing. And that really gave them the concept of what it looks like to be known more for our sending capacity than our seating capacity. But that's how we got to planting churches. We had to change the mentality of people, be Spirit-led, and then, put our money where our mouth was and just go, we're going to trust the Lord in this area.
I had the privilege of going with you down to Florida.
That's right.
You gave $10,000 back to that group who had given $20,000, and they were like, nobody does this. So my last question, and we got just a couple minutes here. Yep. Talk about the goal for generosity that you have for your church, because that's crazy as well.
Yeah, one of the things I'm working on right now is how to communicate what we've done financially, how it's working, because we were church planters. We just kind of flew by the seat of our pants, and now we're like, okay, why did that work? And what happened was, when we started the church, we came with the mentality of, we wanted to be a generous church. And so it's one of our core values. So we decided we're going to give away 20% of the income rather than 10%, like a healthy church might do. And we did that from day one. I mean, from the very first week that we opened. And what we found in the process was, as we began to live off of less, we could get creative and innovative. And so a couple years in, we decided, you know what, why stop at 20%? We're going to shoot for 50%. And I will say at that time, it was more just like a goal. Like, let's just see it. We want to be a core value of generosity. Let's see if we could do this. And what that did for us that I think was really unique, it was a couple of things. And I think it's actually a strategic financial move. And I've got a talk I'm developing on this, because it forced us to think outward and to mobilize, to give away, get to the point where we could give 50% of the resources outside the walls of the church. That is of the total giving, though, not the general tithe. So the strategic thing is that most nonprofits today, people want to give to nonprofits and designate their gifts. I believe in the tithe for the Christian, absolutely 1,000%. But what we have done in addition to that, we've opened up all kinds of opportunities for designated gifts for mission-based things, partners that we've agreed upon, and church planting specifically. And people have given an inordinate amount of resources that way. And that's how we've been able to grow our capacity to make an impact outside the walls of the church. And so we hit probably 2 or 3 years ago, the 50% of the total giving outside the walls of the church. A majority of that actually has gone towards church planting. We raised over $500,000 to start Multiply Indiana. And then we've been in the process of raising $3 million to plant these Mercy Road churches that have been going out as well. And so with those, some of them we're buying buildings and then we're spinning them off as separate legal entities. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing the big vision, the expanded vision, for sharing with us how just what you want to do for God is how crazy that is, and that God's doing it, and that he's doing it through you guys, like the whole 50%. I mean, I was in a couple meetings where I heard megachurch pastors tell you the most you can do is 28. I remember that was the term, and you're like, yeah, I don't think that's true. But thank you for your example. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thanks for joining the Leading Conversations podcast. We hope that you found it both helpful and encouraging. At Excel Leadership Network, our focus is on the church planter rather than the church. If you'd like to find out more about us, visit our webpage at excelnetwork.org. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. See you next time with another Leading Conversation.